How many of you have read the Communist Manifesto?
I have.
What's the number one thing on their agenda?
Kill capitalism.
The abolition of private property. Abolition of private property. And that's what Agenda 21 is all about. So what does Agenda 21 mean? It's the United Nations agenda for the 21st century. And it isn't very likely that a politician would get elected running on a platform of something called Agenda 21. So most often it's called Sustainable Development. And it's important to understand that sustainable development is not a left or right issue, and it's not a Democrat versus Republican issue. It is a globalism versus freedom issue. The definition from the documents about Agenda 21 define it this way. It is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And it's no coincidence that this is almost word for word from the Soviet Constitution of 1977. One way to understand sustainable development is by seeing what is not considered sustainable. That would be these things, including fences, family homes, paved roads, and economic systems that fail to set the proper value on the environment. That would be capitalism and free markets. The objectives of sustainable development are to reduce consumption. And this will be done by created crises, created shortages, to establish social equity, which will mean that America will transfer a big chunk of money to developing nations, and to preserve and restore biodiversity. All of sustainable development is based on the precautionary principle. This means that anything that is done has to be judged on whether or not it might threaten nature in the future. And this is the big problem that we have with our fishing fleets right now, with them setting restrictions on fishing areas and catch limits. Even though the fishermen say, and you can probably vouch for this, that the fish are more plentiful than ever, they are imposing these restrictions on the fishermen out of a precautionary principle. So how does sustainable development fit into our founding documents? In our Declaration of Independence, it says that you are born with rights and government exists to protect those rights, that you and your labor belong to you. And in the UN Declaration of Human Rights, it says that government grants or withdraws rights at its discretion for its own purposes, and that you and the product of your labor belong to the community. So how did we get Agenda 21? In 1992, there was an Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. A man named Maurice Strong was the Secretary General of the UN at that time. Maurice Strong was a Canadian who earned a great deal of money in the oil business. Yet, he said that current lifestyles of the middle class with fossil fuels, air conditioning, and suburban homes were unsustainable. At that same Earth Summit was George H. Bush, the daddy. And he signed on for the United States with 178 countries that said that the United States, he signed on with 178 countries to say that the United States would follow the principles of Agenda 21 and implement it. Next came Bill Clinton, and 7 months into his first term, he signed an executive order that created the President's Council on Sustainable Development, and it directed all of the U.S. government agencies to pursue the path of sustainable development. Other milestones in sustainable development were in 1997, counties and mayors created the Joint Center for Sustainable Communities, and in 2001, the National Governors Conference endorsed smart growth. More on smart growth in a few minutes. This is a partial list of government agencies, non-government organizations, and foundations that are helping to implement Agenda 21. The non-government organizations have the sanction of the UN. They work, among their other work, they work for the UN in implementing Agenda 21. There are 3 E's involved in sustainable development. The first is equity, and that is wealth redistribution, and pretty much it means that we all have the right to suffer equally. The second is that the economy will be transferred from capitalism to public-private partnerships. The businesses will remain in private hands and seek the protection of the government, and in return the businesses promote the government agenda. GE is an excellent example of a public-private partnership, and when Mussolini did it, it was called fascism. There are 2 action plans for implementing Agenda 21 in the United States. The first is the Wildlands Project, which takes place in the rural lands, and then Smart Growth is the urban centers. The Wildlands Project seeks to eliminate humans from 50% of the landscape, and the rest of it will be heavily controlled activity. This is a map, a simulated map of the Wildlands Project after it's completed. The red areas have no human activity. The yellow areas are where the public-private partnerships will have limited activity. And the black areas are where the human settlements will be. These human settlements will be fenced off to keep the people away from the nature. As one planner said, it will be where the humans are in cages and animals roam freely. The purpose of the Wildlands Project is to reimpose wildlife corridors as they once were. And the area that you, I don't have my pointer. That's why I'm practicing.
Use your finger.
The area that you see here is called the Y2Y corridor. That's Yukon to Yucatan. And you can see on the eastern seaboard that the entire peninsula of Florida is taken up. These are wildlife corridors. The way that they will acquire land for the Wildlands Project is through conservation easements, land trusts, endangered species such as the spotted owl, historic preservation. You may have heard last fall that the Obama administration was going to seize 13 million acres under the Antiquities Act. And if that was done, then these would be national monuments and it would lock up the resources. And also eminent domain. I lost my place. The smart growth, the way that smart growth will work is that the public-private partnerships, the partners, government partners, will construct the high-rise apartments that the human beings will live in. They will also use, for example, existing parking lots where these high-rises will be built. And there will be rations of drinking water, food, and energy resources. All cars will be banned and rail use will be promoted. And Governor Scott did a big favor when he killed the high-speed rail, because this is what, you wonder why these people keep pushing the high-speed rail, where we don't want it, where we don't need it. This is in anticipation of the human settlements. And that is how people will get from one human settlement to the other. And there's another rail project in Florida that needs to be killed, and that's called Sunrail. In order to do this, the cities and county governments depend on planning administrators. The most common in Florida is the American Planning Council. Definitely the worst is ICLEI. ICLEI stands for International Council of Local Environmental Initiatives, and it has been renamed to Local Governments for Sustainability. ICLEI has hubs on every continent. ICLEI's goal is to build a worldwide movement of local governments. ICLEI likes to target mayors. They maintain this website called Cool Mayors. And cool mayors are mayors that sign a document saying that they will do everything in their power to implement sustainable development. This gives them national exposure, and I guess stokes their ego. Examples of what ICLEI provides are software, green experts, online resources, training or indoctrination of the staff and elected officials, and notification of grant opportunities. This is what drives the sustainable development, is money from the government. Other funding sources include plenty of NGOs, and I don't believe I explained what an NGO is. It's a non-government organization that has the sanction of the UN, and also departments of the federal government. ICLEI and these other groups like to use warm and fuzzy expressions, and they may not have the same meaning as your Webster's Dictionary. Consensus is a meeting in which the outcome is predetermined, and it is conducted by a facilitator with a group of stakeholders. So if we had a hypothetical city that would conduct a consensus group, there would be a small ad in the paper with a public notice that there was going to be a meeting. And it would be to further the sustainable development goals. So one of the sustainable development goals is to do away with cars. So let's make cars more difficult to drive. We'll make the parking spaces smaller. So you see the notice in the paper that there's going to be a public meeting. In the meantime, ICLEI is assembling the stakeholders. And the stakeholders for this meeting would be Citizens for Bicycles Only, Citizens for Clean Air, and Old Hippies Against Hummers. And so you pull up to the meeting in your brand new Hummer, and immediately you are outnumbered. Your opinions are marginalized. You are maligned until a consensus is reached.